Hey guys, this is Yoda. Blizzard recently posted some patch notes that will be going into effect on the next reset. There are quite a few changes here. Most of them are geared towards the raid. Some are geared towards Mythic Plus, but that means that some classes which may have been overperforming in Mythic Plus got buffed, and some that were underperforming got nerfed, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. All right, we'll just go through these one by one. So Frost Decay, all damage increased by 4%. Don't know if this is going to save Frost Decay in Raid. In Keys, I think it's going to be playable, but probably not the best DPS decay. In my opinion, Unholy Decay is probably better. EDH, deflecting spikes now causes parry to be 10% stronger instead of 15%. So this is actually a very big nerf to VDH. So normally you would think, oh, it's 5% parry, so they'll take 5% more damage. Actually, that's not true because of how parry counts. Normally, if let's say you had 90% parry, and then you went to 95% parry, instead you would be taking half as many melees as before, right? So you don't quite have 90% parry. Obviously, you have anywhere between like 20 to 50 depending on your crit and your build. So the amount that this actually affects you is anywhere from roughly 5 to 10% increased melees taken. So that also means that this nerf is affecting Illuminated Sigils builds more than Down in Flames builds. So people may try to play Down in Flames builds. It also affects crit heavy builds more than non-crit builds. In my opinion, the best build is probably going to be Haste Verse with Down in Flames, or that's at least what I'm going to go with. Going to next week, we'll see what other people play. But yeah, that is where VDH is. This is a pretty big overall nerf to VDH, especially your on pull survivability, because you always spikes on pull. So that I'm foresee a lot of VDHs flopping on pull even more than they currently do. All right, balance. So this is the one I was talking about where it's a bit underperforming in raid, but as we can look at the leaderboard here, almost every key has a moonkin in it. I would say a good like 80% of them or something have a moonkin in it in the top 50 keys. So yeah, despite moonkin overperforming in Mythic Plus, it is getting single target / prio target buffs, which means moonkin is going to the moon in my opinion. Guardian buffs, but they are to Druid of the Claw, so this mostly applies to raid. Druid of the Claw is probably still not playable in Mythic Plus, I would assume. Dev Evoker buffs. So the 4-piece for Dev Evoker was really weak before. Now it was like you only replace last season's tier when you get mythic new season tier, like you wouldn't even replace with heroic tier. But they're buffing the tier set. From what I understand, it is roughly 5% single target and more than that on AoE. So Dev Evoker stonks are actually up good. I believe people are currently playing Flame Shaper builds with Firestorm, which apparently does pretty good priority and AoE damage. So Dev Evoker stonks may be up good. Augmentation Evoker, damage of all spells and abilities increased by 15%. This is only increased to your personal damage, which is roughly, I would say, about a third of Aug's total DPS. So this is like a 5% total DPS increase. I think Aug is still Dedge. I don't think it's going to fix it, so we're leaving it in the Dedge tier. Prez Evoker is getting some really big buffs. 5% all healing, 20% Spirit Bloom, and quite a bit of damage. This will be nice. I think it's enough to move them up a tier on the tier list. Hunter is getting buffs to all 3 specs. I think BM Hunter is a small buff, whereas MM and Survival are getting very big buffs. It would be interesting to see how good Marksman Hunter does and Survival Hunter after the patch changes. I think BM Hunter is going to be like a little bit stronger than it is now right now, but not anything crazy. Some mage tuning as well. Arcane is getting buffed by 8%. From what I understand, Arcane is like unplayable Mythic Plus, mostly due to target caps, so we're going to leave it in a pretty low tier. Frost was already seeing play, especially in Darkflame Cleft. All damage increased by 4% means that you may see quite a few more Frost Mages in the coming weeks. Fire Mage nerfed by 3%. Fire Mage was extremely strong in the raid, so this is like a light slap on the wrist. I think if you're a Fire Mage, you're kind of happy with this. I would say Fire Mage is still one of the best specs in Mythic Plus. I did move it off the S tier because the variety is so good right now. But yeah, I would say you're probably playing Frost in quite a few keys now instead of Fire, especially Darkflame Cleft. But if you play Mage, you're probably going to be expected to play both specs depending on what's better. Windwalker getting all damage nerfed by 4%, Slicing Winds increased by 20%. So this is kind of their way of nerfing Windwalker in raid while keeping it somewhat similar in Mythic Plus, so I don't see a reason to really change the Windwalker tier. Mistweaver is getting a massive damage nerf. All damage decreased by 25%. Spinning Crank Kick damage increased, so their single target is going way down. I believe the healing nerf is quite small. The main thing is that their damage is going down, especially their single target. Before, their single target was extremely strong. It was like the best thing about them. They're beating tanks on single target regularly. That won't be happening anymore. So I think one of Mistweaver's main strengths is now going to be gone. Doesn't really affect their healing too much, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. But yeah, Brewmaster is getting a damage buff. I'm not quite sure how big this is, but I don't think it's going to help that much. To be honest, I wouldn't change Brewmaster's tier. Holy Paladin is getting massive buffs. Shield of Righteous damage increased by 30%. A bunch of healing buffs. All healing increased by 3%. I am actually not quite sure how strong Holy Paladin is going to be, because I haven't played with Holy Paladin that much this season. But these are very, very big buffs. I would not be surprised to see Holy Paladins doing high keys very soon. Rhett is getting a single target buff. From what I understand, this is roughly 5% single target, give or take a few percent depending on your build, which is a good change. Rhett, I think, was already quite good in Mythic Plus, so this will be a good change for them. It was a little bit weak in the raid, so that is probably why they're buffing their single target. Holy Priest is getting hit with some massive buffs. I'm not going to pretend that I understand Holy Priest at a very high level, but these numbers are very big. Holy Priest stonks are up good. Also, indirectly, by the way, if Holy Priest becomes the meta healer somehow, that is stonks up for VDH. Symbols of Hope is extremely strong for VDH because it gives you Firebrand cooldown. Firebrand is like one of your strongest cooldowns as Venus Demon Hunter, so that is one thing to consider. Shadow's getting nerfed because I think Shadow's overperforming in the raid. Shadow has not been overperforming in M+, so this is kind of not great for them in keys. This Priest is getting hit with a pretty sizable nerf. Lenience down to 2% from 3%. And Atonement, from what I understand, this is like slightly less than 10% more, or slightly less than 10% less Atonement healing. Because before it was 35%, now it's 32%, so whatever, percentage that is. It's roughly a little bit less than 10% of a nerf to Atonement. This Priest was already, from what I understand, on the borderline of not being able to heal some keys, especially Voidweaver. However, I have heard rumors that Oracle Disc Priest is completely broken healing-wise. Just does low damage, so we will have to see how that turns out. Assassination Rogue, so the narrow bar 2-piece is getting nerfed, and all damage is getting increased, and their single target's getting increased on top of that. Assassination Rogue was already doing pretty good damage. I wouldn't worry about the tier set change, by the way. This is Season 1 tier set. This should not affect your final build in Season 2. Ellie Shaman, from what I understand, is getting an 8% single target buff, which is kind of needed in my opinion. Ellie is doing really good damage right now. I would say their main issues are that they don't really have that useful utility. As we've mentioned before, in Season 1, Shaman utility was extrememely strong. Like Poison Cleansing Totem could completely negate a lot of mechanics. Tremor Totem was like crucial for Mists Turn of Sight. Like you couldn't even do the dungeon, in my opinion, without Tremor. This season, it's not quite like that. In fact, I would say the utility is, other than like, generic kicks and stops, it's not really useful. So Shamans kind of need to do a lot of damage to be considered a meta pick. That said, Ellie Shaman is doing a lot of damage, especially with these changes, so I would not be surprised to see quite a few Ellie Shamans on the leaderboard soon. Resto Shaman is getting a buff, I think. I'm not sure if this nerf is a big deal, but this is obviously a buff, so we'll see. Resto Shaman has been the source of the Shaman buff, I think, in a few comps. I believe Anabo has been playing, which is the Chinese tank, has been playing Prot Warrior, Resto Shaman as a rogue, or rogue, multi-class rogue, with Unholy Decay and like a X as their like a random 5th other spec. Shaman buff is very good for Prot Warrior, so it's a pretty good combo. We'll see if that continues to show up. Emo Warlock nerfed by 3%. I'm not sure why they did this. Oh, increased by 3%. I am actually not sure why they did this. Seems kind of out of place, but whatever. Prot Warrior's damage is getting nerfed. I'm not quite sure how the comparison is going to be between Colossus and Thane. From what I understand, this is roughly 2 to 5% damage nerf, depending on the target count. I don't think this is going to be enough to change where I value Prot Warrior in the meta. 2 to 5% damage is, a decent amount of damage, but it is still the same defensively, so I don't see a reason to change Prot Warrior. So, without further ado, this is my updated tier list. As you can see, I have moved VDH, Disc Priest, and Fire Mage and Prot Paladin, all out of the S tier. Almost all of the specs, because before it was like this, right? These 3 specs all got nerfed. I do believe I was overvaluing Prot Paladin going into the season. I've noticed the A tier. The biggest weakness Prot Paladin has, honestly, is actually Prior of the Sacred Flame. The first pull and the first boss are extremely difficult, especially if you go left for Prot Paladin. That alone, I think, is enough to move Paladin into the A tier. I have also noticed that in terms of tanking melees, if you have to do that take melees for an extended period of time, Prot Paladin is like kind of weak against that, and it needs quite a bit of extra attention from the healer. If your healer is like, you know, really good at healing the tank, then that's fine, but if it's not like that, then maybe it's not as good. I do still think you can make it work if you're really good at Prot Paladin, but I wouldn't say it's like OP or anything. The other thing is, more tanky classes and less augmentation evokers are making it into the meta, so your 1-minute sack and spell ward are not quite as needed as before. So I'm moving Prot Paladin to the A tier. I did move VDH down a tier as well into A+. Thanks to the parry nerf, I think VDH is still probably has the best survivability of all the tanks, especially if you play Last Resort. But I would say it's like not as crazy of a gap as it was before. So put it in the A+ tier. Other than that, tank balance, I would say other than Brew, is extremely good. We see representation in the top keys by every single tank, I think. Obviously, VDH is overrepresented right now, but it is getting nerfed. Oh, but if we just go to page 2, there's already a Prot Paladin here. Almost every spec is represented in the top 100 keys, I would say. Except Brewmaster, you kind of have to scroll a bit to find, so unlucky. But yeah, I would say tank balance is actually very good right now. As far as healers go, I believe Disc Priest and Resto Druid are probably the best healers at the moment. Mistweaver had, like, damage was a big thing going for it, and that got nerfed. I'm unsure how strong Holy Paladin and Holy Priest are going to be after the buffs. They could very well be up here or here. I just don't know, so I'm putting them in A tier for now. Disc Priest did get hit with a decent nerf, but with people potentially trying out Oracle in the coming weeks, and just generally like having a priest being good in the party, I think Disc Priest still deserves a spot in A+ tier. Moonkin, as we mentioned, is a spec that got buffed when it was already overperforming, so I think I would honestly say Moonkin could be an S tier, but I just put it in A+. Since Resto Druid I think is also very good, and Double Druid is a little bit awkward. Although Kier's group has been playing Double Druid, Argus been playing Double Druid, so, you know, it's kind of tough to rate it, to be honest. All right, we already covered most of these. I think there's not much movement up here in the A+ tier, other than Dev Evoker randomly showing up here. It was already doing okay damage with the Flame Shaper build, and buffs are going to make it ascend, I think, on Tuesday. Unholy Decay and Ret, I think, are the 2 best melee right now, since I think for melee, you have to be extremely tanky to survive a lot of these keys, or not be a burden at least. So I'm putting these 2 in the A+ tier. They also do a very good damage too, to boot. Red Paladin especially is because it's getting buffed. In the A tier for DPS, I've honestly put most of the DPS in the A tier because they've all been performing. If you look at the leaderboard, DPS-wise, it's actually been quite diverse. Noxif's here playing Fury Warrior. We've got Outlaw Rogue, Marks Hunter. Like, there are actually just a lot of different specs on the leaderboard. Obviously, this comp with Boomy, Mage, and Unholy, it seems to be kind of popular near the top, but it's just these 2 groups, really. There is actually quite a lot of diversity in DPS, which is a very good thing. I think this is one of the most balanced seasons we've had in a very long time. So, as always, remember, left-right doesn't matter. I've kind of just put everything in, most of the specs in A tier, other than, like, you know, the standouts, which I put in A+. August still Dedge. Arcane Mage, I think, still isn't that good in keys. Maybe it's okay in theater. And Brew, I think, still needs some love from Blizzard. A little bit more than it got this patch. That said, do remember, we have not had the chance to test out these patches, these patch buffs, like especially Holy Paladin and Holy Priest. Could be very underrated right now in the A tier. I'm not sure how it's going to play out. So do stay tuned. We'll probably do another update, like, once we have the chance to play with all the buff specs and everything. But yeah, that will be it for the video. Thank you all for watching. Peace out.